Sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that come from real life. This next tale isn't a product of someone's imagination. It actually happened. Imagine going to sleep at night, thinking everything was fine, only to wake up to something that should never have been there. This is the true story of the intruder in the attic. It was 2008, and 26-year-old Tracy was living in a small house in Pittsburgh. She had just moved in a few months earlier, excited to finally have a place of her own. The house was older, a little creaky, but nothing too unusual. At first, she loved the quiet. It was cozy and tucked away on a street that rarely had much traffic. But then, things started to feel off. It began with small noises. At night, when Tracy was in bed, she'd hear strange creaking sounds like footsteps above her. The house had an attic, but it was supposed to be empty. Every time she checked, the hatch was securely closed. She tried to shrug it off. Old houses make noises, right? But one night, the noises were louder. She was lying in bed, just starting to doze off, when she heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. This time, they sounded like they were coming from just above her bedroom. She sat up, heart pounding. There was no way this was the wind. No way this was just an old house settling. She lay perfectly still, listening, and then silence. The next morning, Tracy decided to check the attic again. She grabbed a flashlight, dragged over a chair, and opened the hatch. The attic was cold, dusty, and smelled of old wood. She shone the light around, but everything looked untouched. Just the old boxes from the previous owner, piled up against the walls. Nothing seemed out of place, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was up there. A week later, things took an even stranger turn. Tracy was watching TV one evening when she heard a crash in the kitchen. She jumped, ran to the kitchen, and found one of her pots had fallen to the floor. The window was closed and nothing else had moved. Then out of the corner of her eye, she saw something strange. The door leading to the attic was slightly open. Her pulse quickened. She knew she had closed it earlier that day. By now, Tracy was beyond creeped out. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stayed awake, listening for any more noises. And sure enough, around 3 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time they were louder, faster, and then a noise she had never heard before. The sound of something being dragged across the floor. Terrified, Tracy called the police. When they arrived, they checked the house thoroughly and finally went up into the attic. What they found sent chills down her spine. In the corner, behind a stack of old boxes, they discovered a makeshift bed made from old blankets and cushions. Empty food wrappers, bottles of water, and even some of Tracy's belongings, things she hadn't noticed were missing, were strewn around the space. Someone had been living in her attic. The police later determined that whoever had been up there had been using the attic to sneak in and out of her house without her knowing. He had created a small hole in the back wall of the attic, leading to the outside of the house, where he would slip in and out unnoticed. The scariest part? They never caught him. He vanished without a trace, leaving only the unsettling memory of his presence behind. Some of the scariest experiences happen when we least expect them. This is the story of something lurking in the woods, something that shouldn't have been there. It's called the Dark Forest Encounter. It was late autumn in 2015. Megan, a 22-year-old college student, had just finished her finals and decided to spend a weekend camping with her friends. The group, 5 in total, had chosen a remote location, deep within the Appalachian Mountains, far away from civilization. They were looking for some peace and quiet after the stress of school, but what they found was something far more sinister. The first night was perfect. They set up camp, made a fire, and shared ghost stories under the stars. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But on the second night, things began to feel different. They had planned to do some stargazing, but the sky was covered in thick clouds and the forest around them had grown unnervingly silent. No wind, no animals, nothing but the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. As night fell, an uneasy feeling settled over the group. "It feels weird out here," Megan said quietly, but the others brushed it off. They chalked it up to being in a remote area and tried to enjoy the night. At around 2 a.m., Megan awoke in her tent. The fire had gone out and everything was pitch black. She could hear something moving in the distance. At first, she thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but the footsteps were heavy, too heavy. Curious, she unzipped her tent slightly and peeked out into the dark woods. She could barely see anything, just the outlines of the trees in the distance. But there was something else, standing between the trees, a figure, tall, dark, and completely still. Megan's heart began to race. She blinked, trying to focus her eyes, but the figure wasn't moving. Is someone out there? She whispered to herself, but the figure remained still. Suddenly, it began to move. Not like a person walking, its movements were jerky, unnatural. It seemed to slide between the trees, growing closer and closer to their camp. Megan froze in terror, unable to look away. She wanted to wake her friends, but couldn't make a sound. The figure stopped just outside their campsite, hiding in the shadows at the edge of the trees. Then, it spoke. The voice was low and distorted, like it was being played backward. "Come closer," it whispered. Megan's blood ran cold. She knew she had to wake her friends, but fear kept her frozen in place. The figure began to move again, circling the camp slowly, as if it were watching them. The voice came again, this time louder. "Come closer." Megan snapped out of her paralysis and scrambled to wake her friends. They groggily stirred, confused and irritated. But when they saw the terror in her eyes, they fell silent. She pointed toward the trees, her hands shaking, but the figure was gone. They stepped out of their tents cautiously, shining flashlights into the trees, but saw nothing. The forest was empty, just dark, silent woods. But Megan knew what she saw. The rest of the night was spent in terrified silence. They huddled together in the tents, jumping at every sound, every crack of a twig. They didn't sleep. When morning finally came, they packed up and left without a word. As they reached the edge of the forest and began to feel some relief, Megan turned to look back one last time, and there it was. The figure standing far off in the distance, hidden among the trees, watching, waiting. There are some places where we are not meant to go, and sometimes when we do, something follows us back. Have you ever encountered something unexplainable? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales.